Hello and welcome to this lecture video. So this lecture video is going to give you an overview of standard costing. So when we talk about a standard, we're talking about a bench or norm for performance, okay? So if we make pizzas, for example, make a cheese pizza, we could say that each cheese pizza that we make requires 1 pound of dough, 1 jar of tomato sauce, and 1 pound of cheese. That would be a standard. That's a material standard for making one pizza. We could also say, for example, that each pizza that we make should take a half an hour to make. That would be a labor time standard, or what we call an efficiency standard. Okay? What we can also say, is that each pound of dough costs $1 to buy, and each pound of cheese costs $1 to buy, and each jar of tomato sauce costs $1 to buy. So that would be a price standard for the pizza. And then what we could say is that we pay our employees $15 per hour to make the pizza. So what we have over here, if we think about a standard, we have a quantity standard and we have a price standard for making the pizza, right? What we could say is that each pizza requires that 1 pound of dough at $1 per pound, 1 pound of cheese at $1 per pound, 1 jar of tomato sauce at $1 per jar of tomato sauce. That's the quantity standard and price standard for our materials. What we could also say, getting back to that example, is that our pizza takes a half an hour to make, which is our quantity standard in terms of labor, and we pay our employees $15 per hour, which is our price standard for labor. That's what I mean by standards. It's some benchmark for measuring performance. And so what we can say is that we could add all those up, and we could say this is how much it should cost us to make one pizza, which is our benchmark. And then what we can say is, here's how much it actually costs us to make our pizza, and then we can compare the two and see whether we're favorable or unfavorable, okay? So let me give you another example right over here, and I'll try to write it out. Suppose that we're making widgets, right? Whatever widget that we make. To make one widget or one unit of whatever we make, what we have is we have a cost breakdown. We have our direct materials, we have our direct labor, and then we have our manufacturing overhead, right? We can say that each unit that we make requires 2 pounds at $5 per pound. And so what I can say is that each unit requires 2 pounds of material at $5 a pound. So that would mean that the cost for each unit for materials is $10. The 5 times the 2. Then what I can say is that each unit requires 3 hours at $10 per hour, which means that we have $30 of labor cost per unit. And then what we can say is our overhead, let's say that we have $5, we charge $5 of overhead, that's our rate of overhead per hour. And then we know that each unit takes those 3 hours, so then in this case times 3 hours, which means that our overhead is $15 per unit. And what I can do is I can add the 10 plus the 30 plus the 15, which means it should cost us $55 to make one unit. And that would be our standard cost right over here. And what I also have over here is I have a quantity standard and a price standard. And showing that in a little bit more detail, my quantity standard for materials is 2 pounds. My quantity standard for labor is 3 hours. My price standard for materials is $5 per pound. My price standard for labor is $10 per hour. So I can have a quantity standard and a price standard for both materials and for labor. Okay? So then this becomes my standard cost. Now when I talk about this term, the budgeted cost, so what we could say is that the budgeted cost, the term standard, refers to the cost of a single unit. But the budgeted cost would be the total number of units. So if we made 10 units, right, and it costs us $55 per unit, what we could say is multiply that times the 10 units that we make. Should cost us $550 to make those units. Okay? That's the difference between standard and standard versus budgeted. Standard is on a per unit basis. Budgeted is the cost, the standard of the total number of budgeted units. So if we budget to make 10 units, it costs us on standard $55 per unit. We should have a total cost of $550. Okay? Now in terms of developing some of these standards, our standard quantity and our standard price for material could be specified in engineering plans. It could be in recipes or formulas that we have, or it could also be in price lists that are provided by suppliers. In terms of our standard quantity and rate for our direct labor, where could that be specified? By motion studies that are conducted by industrial engineers. Industrial engineers will frequently time people to see how long it takes them to do something, and they could do some time and motion studies to decide, you know what, it should take us 3 hours to make this unit, or it should take us half an hour to make a pizza, something like that. We could also analyze past data. We could look at contracts that also set labor rates, and this was frequently done when I worked in government contracting, that we had labor rates set by the contracts. Okay? So that became a price standard for our labor. Standards fall into two different categories. We have ideal standards, and then we have attainable standards. Ideal standards would be developed under the assumption that there's no problems. Okay? No one takes a smoke break. Nobody messes up. Those would be ideal standards. Attainable standards, on the other hand, allow for normal breakdowns and also for people to take breaks, take a smoke break, take a rest, any other kind of breaks. That would be more attainable standards. So when we talk about a standard cost variance, that term means difference, right? So what we're going to be looking at in future lecture videos is calculating the difference between the standard cost and then what we actually paid, and what the actual cost that we incurred, okay? And so that becomes what we call our standard cost variance, right? And so some of the things that we'll be looking at in future lecture videos is calculating a price variance for materials, quantity variance for our direct materials, a price variance for labor, which we call labor rate variance, and then a quantity variance for labor, which is what we call our labor efficiency variance. Now, in terms of what needs to be included in our direct material standard, we can say our standard price per unit for direct materials should be the final delivered cost of materials. It should include, for example, the specified quality of materials, any discounts for early purchases, discounts for early payment, transportation costs, and also receiving and handling costs. Okay? If you think about our standard quantity per unit for materials is the amount that should go into the finished unit of the product. What should that reflect? Our engineering requirements, any kind of spoilage. So you can see right over here, this is an attainable standard. This is not an ideal standard. How do I know that? Because I'm talking about some spoilage, unexpected waste, and then some mistakes which turn into rejects or scrap units. Okay, so this would be attainable standards. Some of the things that would go into how we decide what is our standard for making for direct materials from one unit. As I was saying earlier, how do we decide that each pizza requires 1 pound of dough, 1 jar of tomato sauce, 1 pound of cheese? We have our requirements, but then we are also including in there some expected problems with spoilage and then waste. Okay, so we are looking at attainable standards here. What should be included in our direct labor standards? Our rate per hour should include our wage rates that we pay our employees, and then also any employment taxes, and then any fringe benefits. Okay? this is what we'll be working with in future lecture videos, is just using a single standard rate for all employees. This simplifies things, and it would be based upon the expected mix of high and low wage rate employees. And so basically, we're going to simplify it, okay? In terms of how we get to the standard hours per unit of direct labor, how can we figure that out? Well, we say, how much time should it take us to make a pizza, for example? But then we're also going to include any allowance for breaks, personal needs, cleanup, and then machine downtime, and then also any rejects that we may have too. All right? So again, an attainable standard, and again, this will be getting to the idea of how did we decide that it takes us a half an hour to make one pizza? This is how we do it. We include all these in that estimate of taking a half an hour to make one pizza. I'm going to skip down here. I'm not going to worry about, we'll do a little bit of variable overhead, but in this lecture video and in future lecture videos, we're going to be focusing more on direct materials and direct labor. All right. So I do want to come down here and focus here. Why do we determine price and quantity standards separately? It's because different managers could be responsible for buying and using the inputs. Who is typically responsible for buying the materials? The purchasing manager. Who would be responsible for appropriate use of our materials? The production supervisor. Okay? Also, the buying and using activities occur at different points in time. We'll buy the materials, and then maybe a month later, we'll use the materials, or a week later, however long it takes. Okay? But the other thing that we have to think about really is, coming back to this first one, is that the standard costing will be used to evaluate managers. How well did they do? How well did they do? If we say that on average it should have cost you $5 for materials to make one unit, and it costs you $6, that's a problem. Who do we hold accountable? Well, we're going to have to look at the purchasing manager in that situation, because they're responsible for setting the price, for getting the best price that we can. On the other hand, if we think about a direct materials issue, a direct materials usage issue, we could say, you know what, we should use a pound of dough in each cheese pizza that we make, right? But it turns out that on average, we used 1.5 pounds. Who do we need to hold accountable? The production supervisor, because they are the ones responsible for making sure that the inputs are used in an appropriate manner, okay? So when we look over here and move on, we can say different managers are typically, as I was saying, different managers are responsible for buying and using inputs, and those can occur at different points in time. Those differences between our standard prices and our actual prices, and our standard quantities and our actual quantities, are called variances. And as I was saying, we can do those for materials, labor, and variable overhead. We'll be focusing mainly on materials and labor. Okay? Here becomes our formula. We can take the actual quantity times the actual price, then our actual quantity times our standard price, and our standard quantity times our standard price. Here becomes our formula for calculating our price. This is our formula for calculating our quantity variance. So we take, in terms of price variance, we say the actual quantity purchased times the actual price paid minus the actual quantity purchased times the standard price paid, and then you could factor it out and use this equation. In terms of the quantity variance, we say this is the actual quantity used times the standard price. This is the standard quantity that we should have used times the standard price. Okay? Unfavorable variance means that actual, because we're dealing only with costs, would be greater than the standard. Okay? On the other hand, we look up here at the next page, and a favorable variance, because we're only dealing with costs, would be the opposite situation if actual is less than standard. Okay? So in the next lecture video, I'm going to go over this company, Speeds Incorporated, who makes jogging suits, and we're going to be calculating our direct materials standards, our direct labor standards, our variable overhead, and then also calculating variances. Thank you.